and somehow either abducted him, which seems very hard because you'd have to essentially drag him down a hallway to an elevator or a stairwell. There's elevators and stairs on those buildings. And then you would have had to drag him either out an emergency exit, which would have set off an alarm, or you would have had to drag him back past the front desk. And each one of these buildings has a big front desk, and it's a protected entryway as well. So if you don't live in that building, you're going to have a harder time getting in the building.
And we are live, everyone. Welcome back to the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 5. My name is Juras. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host Glenn, and today we will be talking about the mysterious disappearance of Michael Negrete, who was basically a UCLA student who went missing in 1999, December 10th. So Glenn, I know that this case in particular has a sort of a personal connection to you. Am I not mistaken?
No, you're right. So I attended UCLA as a transfer student from 1996 to 1998, and I lived on campus, much like Michael did. In fact, just up the street from him. He wasn't there at the time because I was a senior in 98 and he was a freshman in 99, but I'm very familiar with not only this case, but the actual area involved, and I hope to give some extra personal information about some aspects of this case and what direction I think we should go in terms of how solvable this is.
Right, so this is the building that you lived in 1998, right?
Yeah, there was Hitch Suites. I think I was in the A building, and I lived right up that. You can actually see my window the second year I lived there, which was right there, and we could even see the ocean from there, believe it or not,
Oh, wow.
on some days. Yeah, all the way across. I think it was maybe Palos Verdes or Santa Monica or something. We could see out that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, really cool. So basically, Michael William Negrete, he was a freshman. He was 18 years of age at the time of his disappearance, and as I've mentioned before, he disappeared on the December 10th, 1999. So, just right before the holiday season had started, and he was living in the Dykstra Hall, the building that you can see on the Google Maps right now. And I don't think I remember at which floor he was living at. Do you know that, Glenn?
Oh, I'm not sure. It's a good question. I feel like it was higher up in the building, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also what I've be that's something I heard also, I think. And so basically he went missing basically during the night because he was, as most young freshmen, staying up late on December 10th, and he was playing a video game with somebody like from another room, someone in, I believe, Dykstra Hall, right? So he was playing,
Yeah.
so he was playing a video game online, and he basically lost the game, I believe, and he got up from his apartment and he went to congratulate the other player, and apparently he never came back once he left. So he left at around 4 at after midnight, and at like 9 in the morning, his roommate noticed that Michael had not returned, and that's basically the quick gist of the story. Do you have anything else to add to like the initial story?
No, I mean that's essentially what happened. It really was that simple. It was like depending on what narrative you read, because I think his brother gave some additional details some years later in an interview that you can find online. But yeah, sounds like he was he had earlier in the evening he'd spent the night partying, drinking, like you said, but that's what college students do.
Yeah.
I certainly did my share of drinking at UCLA. Um, so yeah, he was drinking. He was having a good time. I think he was listening to music with some friends earlier at maybe like a informal party at one of the other rooms. And then yeah, he went and just for context too, 1999. You're still talking about the pretty early days of the internet, and this is when most people in the world did not have like DSL or like cable internet didn't even exist yet. So what was nice about living at UCLA was you had an extremely fast connection on the internet. I believe UCLA is one of the 8 original hubs of the internet
Mm.
back when it was ARPANET. So I can't stress it enough. I remember one time like downloading a really huge file, for the time, for the 90s in about 10 seconds. And me and one of my roommates, we were just like, wow, like that. And literally I never saw that speed again until maybe 10, 15 years later. So that's how wired UCLA is. So yeah,
Yeah.
I certainly myself spent plenty of nights staying up late playing Quake, the original Quake, with my roommate and against other people
Mm.
on and off campus there.
Do you know what game Michael was
Yeah,
playing?
that's what I was wondering. I was trying to think of the year, and I'm not sure. Like at the time, the big games were, I think Quake 2 was out,
Yeah.
but there was also Command and Conquer was really big at that point.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm not totally sure. I'm gonna guess it was either a first person shooter or a strategy game. But yeah, that would be a nice detail to know. I wish that they would have known that. Maybe nobody really told any reporters that.
Yeah, maybe back in the day they didn't think this was a detail worth mentioning or anything like that. So yeah, so basically we let's jump right into
Actually,
yeah.
you know what?
Okay.
Just to put a pin on that, I'm
Yep.
glad you asked though, because I think had it been a few years later,
Hmm.
um, massive multiplayer games had not really come about yet. Like literally, it was that year was one of the first ones with EverQuest. So it's worth asking because in theory, if it had been a game that was massively social, like a massive multiplayer game,
Yeah.
a lot of people do form like relationships. Like just goes to show you, people can get pretty involved. But I do not
Yeah.
think that was the case here.
Yeah, so this is basically a compilation of images of Michael William Negrete. So the strange thing in this case is that, during my initial research, I did not manage to find any good quality pictures of Michael. So, this is just a compilation of pictures that I found online. And yeah, this is basically as good as the quality gets for the pictures. It has been a long time. It happened in 1909, but still, like, don't you think it's quite weird that we don't have any like high quality pictures, given the fact that this man, is still missing and his family members are like, actively trying to find him, and this is all we have in terms of the pictures. For me, that's shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even expand on that a little bit. That I was kind of shocked. So I've been following this case. Full disclosure, I've been following this case since around the time it happened. One of my coworkers, uh, he also went to UCLA, and this popped up in his radar, so he got it on my radar. And yeah. I mean, it was certainly it was something where at one point the UCPD had a dedicated portion. So UCPD is University of California Police Department. So like our universities have actually their own police departments
Mm.
that all work with, of course, the local police departments. But they had a entire section dedicated to him because it is pretty weird for a student at UCLA or any major college like that to suddenly go missing. And when it happens, it does attract a lot of attention. So yeah, I mean, there's not even a photo for us like this. Michael would be only about 5 years younger than me now. 4 or 5 years. I
Mhm.
am 43, so he would be, 38, 39. It would have been nice to see a photo of him aged up, maybe a little weight put on him, just in case he is still alive, for someone to kind of find him. So yeah, to your
Right.
point, it's a little bit weird that, like, anything else, almost any other kind of missing child or missing teen, you often do see, you don't see things just disappear like that, but here we are. It almost seems like the world's forgotten about this case a little bit, at least when it comes to like the police department.
Yeah, that's actually very sad to hear, because given the fact that the family members they are actively trying to find Michael, and or at least try to figure out what actually happened, because this case is completely cold. There's no like real main suspects, or like concrete theories on what actually happened to Michael. So it's definitely sad to hear that people are starting to forget about this case, and I think it's almost like our duty to give light to this case once again, because at least I'm certain that the mother of Michael would definitely want that, right? You've like heard that his family is constantly trying to find out what happened, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it just must be so heartbreaking, and yeah, the fact that someone like this, who did not seem to have any apparent problems, which we'll get into, someone that seemed to have in many ways a perfect life, and who was well liked by his
Yeah.
friends, peers, and of course his family, to suddenly disappear like this,
Hmm.
and that's I think what made this case stand out in my mind so much, is that sometimes you hear about things happening to people, and
Right.
you can't help but think like, well, maybe they brought it on themselves, or maybe they were doing things in their lives that were like increasing the risks that something adverse could happen. But
Hmm.
aside from some rumors of recreational drug use, which we'll get into, but is nothing shocking. It's just sort of like
Yeah.
the normal teenage and college stuff, not anything
Yeah.
too crazy. Um, there doesn't seem to be a lot of explanation, so that's why today we're gonna break down some of these theories about what happened to Michael, and really try to see how
Hmm.
close we can come to solving it in terms of
Yeah.
plausibility. And yeah.
Right. So basically, just returning a little bit to like who was Michael at the time of his disappearance. Basically, Michael was a popular freshman at UCLA, and he was also on a music scholarship. So yeah, it definitely seemed like he was living a perfect life, you could say at that point. Right. And at the time when he went missing, he actually left all of his, involuntarily, most likely left all of his belongings at home. I mean, at the apartment in Dykstra Hall, all of his music equipment, all of his, belongings. So it would
his,
seem,
his wallet and keys and everything, right?
yeah, so it would definitely seem that it's quite unlikely that, this man, um, decided to leave everything like that just unaccounted for, and just start like living a new life, or like get a new identity. So right off the bat, I'm unsure that that was the case. I'm thinking that something unfortunate had happened to Michael. What is your take on that, Glenn?
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. So yeah, and let's start getting down into what could have happened, and first let's start with something that most people would guess. Most people, when someone goes missing like that, usually your first guess is, especially if it's an adult, oh well, maybe the person disappeared themselves. Like maybe they, for whatever reason. So let's take, like, for instance, what's been suggested, and I even had this thought before, the family and everybody kind of said, no, this isn't the case. But sometimes you have somebody who is on like a track in life where maybe they didn't set that in motion. Like, I think we've all heard about parents that try to live through their children and like set them up and like, well, you're going to be a lawyer, little Johnny. And they set them on that track, and they drill it into their heads. And then at some point that child grows up to become an adult, and maybe they realize they haven't been making the decisions for themselves,
Mm,
and they also, like, maybe they don't like the track they're on. And sometimes, depending on what part of the country you're from, and what culture you come from, and what your other beliefs your family might have, sometimes some of those decisions, let's say it's lifestyle decisions, let's say it's like sexual orientation decisions, things like that about how you want to live your life, sometimes those decisions can, you might either have so much anxiety
mhm.
about how your family's, embarrassment, like, oh, I don't want to tell my family that I believe in this, or that I, want that, whatever it is.
Yeah.
that could be an extreme reason why some people just cut ties, disappear themselves, maybe make a new life. I think some of my issues around this are a his family says they do not think that was the case. There doesn't seem to be any rumblings. You would think he would at least told a peer or someone else like that if there was some reason why he was trying to deviate from his life. It's also worth pointing out he had a music scholarship. He had a music scholarship to um, either the best or second best public college in
Mm.
not only California but the United States. So what's significant about the UC system for California residents specifically is if you're a California resident, the cost of UCLA, which is an extremely good school and has professors that are almost all from like Ivy League colleges or also from UCLA, you are paying a fraction of what you would pay at a private college. So at the time when Michael was going there to UCLA,
Mm.
I know he wasn't paying for it because he was on scholarship, which is even better. But you would pay maybe between $11,000 and $13,000 a year for both tuition and living there if you lived there.
Mhm.
Um, Compare that to UCLA's rival school, University of Southern California, across town. At that time, you were paying around $30,000 or more a year um,
Mm.
for tuition and living there. So that's what California does. Is California, they may not do this as much now, but California would essentially make a bet on you as a California resident. So Michael, case in point, local boy grows up here in California. State of California says, hey, guess what, California resident? We are going to make a bet on you. We are going to subsidize 2/3 of your education. In this case, they subsidize 100%, so that you will grow up to become a successful person in life, and you will pay taxes, and we'll get that money back.
Yeah.
Uh,
Makes
over our,
sense. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely makes sense. Yeah, so
So,
basically, yeah, what were you saying?
so just to finish off that thought, so that's
Mhm.
where people talk about that, and they're like, well, he abandoned his life, and I just, yeah, it doesn't seem to fit. I won't rule it out completely because I
Yeah.
think there certainly are other reasons why people might do this that are not voluntary, which we can get into next. But yeah, I discount the theory that, like, I'll just throw this out there, that like maybe he had an sexual orientation issue or some other thing where he was like, I just want to dance, whatever it was. I just want to
Mhm.
work on a cruise ship. I just want to, explore Central America, whatever it was. That it does not seem likely that he would have, coming from the loving family he seems to have come from, that he would have gone that far and done
Right.
something that was, just so cold hearted.
Right.
Just cut off the
So,
family.
yeah, so basically continuing with the case, the only, somewhat credible lead was that several of the students that lived in Dykstra Hall at that time, they gave a description of a Caucasian man who had been spotted on the floor on the night of Negrete's disappearing, whom no one could account for. So basically, there was an alleged, Caucasian man on the same floor at the Dykstra Hall. So he was unaccounted for, and he was spotted, I believe, right after Michael left his apartment to go and congratulate the other player. So, like the timeline of this man being involved would match up, but during my research, I just didn't really find, a lot of information of this Caucasian man who was unaccounted for. So, I didn't really find any information, so it's hard for me to really say how big of a detail this is in the disappearance of Michael Negrete. So, have you heard anything about this more?
Yeah, I mean, so there was, so yeah, there was, even back then there was this sketch of this person that was seen around the same time, and it is kind of funny because yeah, it's like it's literally you have buildings like this are huge. This dorm building is huge, and there's several more of them across that side of the campus. This is actually the on the map you're showing right now.
Yeah.
The whole west side of campus is the living quarters. So like where you see like the football field and the intramural field and things like that, that's sort of the dividing line where like if when you live there, you actually live up on a hill. So it's what you don't really see here is because the map doesn't really show that well. UCLA is built in an area that became very wealthy. So literally across the street from UCLA to the north is Bel Air. That's what that golf course is, just to the north
Oh,
of it. Yeah, that
wow.
whole neighborhood up north is. So literally, you go to Sunset, and you go across the street, and that whole part north of Sunset for a couple miles in each direction, it's literally probably the wealthiest part of Los Angeles, or let's just say some of the wealthiest individuals and some of the most
Wow.
famous individuals in the world live in that neighborhood.
Oh,
So it's kind
wow.
of weird. Yeah, UCLA was built, I think, back in the 20s, and land values were much different then. So now
Yeah.
UCLA's got a weird problem where whenever they want to expand, they either have to dig down or dig up. They can't really go out anymore because literally they're just surrounded by extremely,
Billionaires.
yeah, billionaires and expensive real estate. It's a weird problem to have. So I mentioned that because, and this I think ties into what we're looking at here. Um, there was a lot of construction going on back then, and even now, I believe they're probably still doing construction. They seem to perpetually be doing construction since 1994. So right after the earthquake in '94, did a lot of damage, and a lot of places, schools, homeowners like us, etc.,
Mhm.
used it as a reason to add on, take the insurance money and do a little more with it. So that was going on there. Let's go back to you were mentioning the man that was seen on the floor. So it is
Yeah.
funny because it's like it is hilarious to think that like there's so many people between the ages of 18 and let's say 23 that yeah, a 35-year-old man or so would definitely stand out in those halls. If you go to those halls, it literally is just people that used to be children, a year ago, 2 years
Still
ago.
are, still are like
Yeah,
really young. You can almost say, still
absolutely. Yeah,
teenagers.
not mature by any means. I mean, they're getting more mature. They're becoming adults,
Yeah.
but I saw my share of childish behavior for sure at UCLA, or any college.
Mm.
So that is kind of interesting. So like let's go down that for a second. So one theory is this suspicious man, this middle-aged man, and there is actually a person that some people point at to be potentially this person, but that this middle-aged man somehow met Michael right after he he congratulated his friend on the game and somehow either abducted him, which seems very hard because you'd have to essentially drag him down a hallway to an elevator or a stairwell. There's elevators and stairs on those buildings. And then you would have had to drag him either out an emergency exit, which would have set off an alarm, or you would have had to drag him back past the front desk. And each one of these buildings has a big front desk, and it's a protected entryway as well. So if you don't live in that building, you're going to have a harder time getting in the building. It's not impossible because you can often follow a student that has a key card right after them and just, I'm going to go up the stairs, or
Hmm.
I'm going to go in the elevator. But 4 in the morning, it's not as crowded. It would seem kind of weird. I think the people at the front desk might actually perk up and ask you if you're supposed to be there if like someone my age showed up at Dykstra Hall at 4 in the morning today or 20 years ago and
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, I'm just hanging out. I live here. No, you don't live here, old man. What are you doing?
That's
Uh,
yeah, that's to that point, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really like think about like this detail in that thoroughly. Like how would you actually manage to, export Michael out of the Dykstra hall without anyone noticing, given it was like 4 after midnight, so it was most people were sleeping, but it's still like I don't know. Did they have like security cameras back in '99? I'm not sure, but I think someone would have, like if Michael was actually struggling, maybe he went out, willingly. Like I could definitely, consider that fact.
yeah,
But if he was struggling to actually force him out of the Dexter hole, like that just that's just really pushing it, and I don't think that was the case. I don't think
yeah.
I don't see how that could be the case.
that seems like at this point we can almost push it to the very bottom of our list of likely scenarios.
Yeah.
I want
I
to
mean,
stick
we have even more
about him.
unlikely
Yeah,
theory
about
later on in the episode that we are
yeah,
going to
yeah. As I was going to
discuss.
say,
Yeah.
we should stick a pin in this topic because I think some of the most interesting, maybe whimsical, but at least attempts to try to address this specific part of it. Um,
Right.
there's like a whole rabbit hole that we want to explore. But before we do that, I want to just really quickly address some of the simpler explanations and just give some detail on that. And then we can come back to the mysterious 35-year-old man that was seen on the premises. So you're showing where he lives right here. For context, back in 1999, I believe all of those kind of like pink roofed buildings to the north of it weren't there. So
You're talking about
uh,
these ones, right?
yeah, yeah, and in fact, even like the dorm, even north of there. So I used to live, where I lived. Even the building across the street from where I lived got literally like doubled in size since I've lived there.
That
UCLA, and it used to be
yeah.
so frustrating to me living there because there was so much construction noise constantly during the day. UCLA has like I think in some ways doubled in size. Like it already was a massive campus when I was there. I think the student body population was somewhere around maybe 20,000 at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and people living on campus, I think, was closer to like 8 or 10,000. I could be way off on those numbers, but that's what I think I remember saying. So it's interesting because you look at like those other fields to the left of it. I'll tell you how much construction was done that they even built parking structures underneath the fields. That's how strapped they were for space, and that's how busy they were
Mm.
fixing the campus and then building more of the campus, and then they built more dorms, and yeah, it's a whole thing. So um, I mentioned this because where Michael lived at Dykstra is sort of at the bottom of a big hill. If you think of like north to south, UCLA is built kind of on like two hills. So if you live in those dorms up there, depending on how far north you are, I used to joke that I would walk uphill both ways, almost like that. There's like an American joke that like people's parents talk about how hard they had it in the old days. They used to walk uphill to school both ways in the snow. But the funny thing is, like at UCLA, you actually do walk uphill both ways. So you walk all the way down the hill to those fields in the middle, and then you walk back up the hill to the school buildings, and your legs get very strong at UCLA. I mention this because what happens is, at one of the theories was when when police had done their investigation, they got bloodhounds, and
Yep.
I have no idea how this works when you have a campus full of thousands of people walking around all over the place every day, and cars and all that other stuff, because those roads are constantly busy. It looks empty here, it looks all nice and clean and like unoccupied, but during the day there are like sometimes traffic jams on those roads.
I
There's
bet.
a lot of
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people driving on campus, a lot of people walking on campus. If you live in those buildings, you're walking back and forth between like the dining hall, and you're walking to your class, and you're doing, your other stuff. So anyway, so they took these bloodhounds and they set them loose, and they tracked it supposedly all the way up to Neve Drive here. And you go up to Neve Drive, and then there's the baseball diamond up there, softball diamond, and
Yeah.
then right there at that intersection, there are at Sunset and Deneve, where Deneve becomes Bellagio Road and becomes Bel Air. Right around there are several bus stops, and the bus stops go lots of places. Some of them go east on Sunset, so to go to like West Hollywood or Beverly Hills, etc. You go east, and then if you go
Yeah.
west, that's towards the beach. So you go west, you go towards Santa Monica and Brentwood and Pacific Palisades and neighborhoods like that. So they had supposedly traced his scent there. I
Yeah.
have problems with this. I have problems with this in two ways.
Hmm.
So one is I noticed someone's comment on someone else's YouTube video about this. There were some good comments, and one of the comments was there was a girl that went to UCLA around the same time, a woman, I should say, and she said, "Oh, back then we used to use the bus all the time and go all over the place." And I don't know if that's really true. I don't really remember seeing a lot of students other than maybe people that lived, in the area and didn't live on campus. I don't really remember a lot of students using buses. Maybe it's just selective memory. But my other issue with that is, so I don't know that he would have even known how to use a bus in LA.
Hmm.
Full disclosure is that in Los Angeles, not a lot of residents in certain income levels. So if you're like maybe upper middle class, you're not necessarily going to know how to use the city bus. You may have used the subway or something like that, but like city buses, there's an old song in Los
Hmm.
Angeles called "Nobody Walks in L.A." because Los Angeles is so stretched out. A lot of people do depend on cars. My first year at UCLA, I didn't have a car, but I also didn't really leave campus much. So if he was going to go up there to that bus stop, at 4 in the morning, that's a pretty steep uphill walk. Like that's a good, I don't know, maybe half a mile walk.
Yeah,
I got
because
to
like
guess.
I just quickly want to mention the fact that you probably can't see from the Google Maps that this is actually, as you're saying, Glenn, a walk up hill, right? So
Oh, yeah, it's a pretty, it's a decent grade
yeah.
hill, and I mean I can tell you I used a handful of times I walked from my dorm at the top of that hill down to Westwood Village. So Westwood Village is the shopping area and restaurants and things like that just south of the campus.
Hmm.
And that's traditionally where, like, if you were living in a dorm and you wanted to get maybe some extra groceries or something, beer or something,
Yeah.
that's where you'd have to go. But it frankly was really hard because other than maybe some local shuttles and things like that UCLA sometimes had running during certain times of the day, not 4 in the morning, um, you
Yeah.
wouldn't you wouldn't walk up a hill to go to the shopping. You would just go where he was. He was actually in almost the perfect place to have an easier access to the shopping areas and restaurants and dining facilities, etc. South of him, whatever was open. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I find it implausible that he went to the bus stop for a lot of reasons. I find it implausible that the dogs, given all of the foot traffic, car traffic, and everything else, I feel like the dogs were just following the trail of tens of thousands of feet going to that bus stop, and that's why they went there. They're like, oh, well,
Mm.
this is, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? This
Yeah,
is where
because if
humans walk. So
because if I'm not mistaken, like even like some of the police officers or like police officials stated that this bloodhound investigation that led to the bus stop was fairly uncredible. It's like not super legitimate. So even the police acknowledged the fact that it's like it's hard to really say if the bloodhounds actually picked up Michael's scent, or was it just did they just follow where there was a lot of scent. So it's really
yeah,
hard to say what actually the bloodhounds picked up.
I can't even think. I laugh because I can't even think of another case in Los Angeles where I ever even heard of someone else using bloodhounds. Like that's how,
Mm.
because we're in such a big crowded city and we have such a high population. I didn't even know we used bloodhounds anymore in this. Like when I hear bloodhounds, I think of, like, I don't know, somewhere really rural where, like, they don't have this problem of 10,000 people a day tromping around the place.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That
yeah.
that that was definitely weird also for me when I was researching. Why would they use bloodhounds? But I guess they had to use something. They couldn't just. I guess this just speaks to the fact that how little leads or like credible leads the case had, that this was a complete vanishing of sorts. That they had to do these measures of using bloodhounds.
So then here's the thing. So then we could go down before we kind of finish off this point. We could say, okay, well, let's say he did, though. Let's say the bloodhounds were right. He, for some reason, he walked half a mile at 4 in the morning with no wallet, no keys. We're not even sure if he had shoes. There's a lot of dispute about whether his shoes were still in his room. No one really seems to know how many shoes he owned. If I were to guess, I know a lot of people that lived in the dorms would get like those sort of like plastic sandals
Hmm.
that massage your feet. I can't remember what they're called.
The
But
Crocs or something
yeah,
like that.
or something like, yeah, something similar to like that. I can't. There's another name for them. They're like these little things that massage
Hmm.
your feet and walk. But yeah, what I mean, like obviously not shoes and socks and stuff, just something easy to put on. So maybe he had that on, but like, why would he do that? Why would he walk half a mile to the bus stop and do that? Now, his brother his brother's theory, and this will maybe tie into the rest of the stuff, is that
Yeah.
maybe he was high on because he was drunk, or because he was high on maybe something like ecstasy, because he'd heard that Michael had started experimenting with, ecstasy, which is
Yeah.
MDMA, a party drug. And I'll just say right now, I've never heard. And if people disagree with this, please, tell us in the comments. Please reach out to us. We'd love to kind of further discuss this with you. We'd love to hear your opinions. But yeah, I mean, I've never heard of somebody on ecstasy playing video games. I think they're usually dancing or like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
hugging
definitely.
someone.
Yes, so just basically a quick note on that theory. So in 2013, Negrete's brother Steve, a member of the band Steam Powered Giraffe, stated that prior to his disappearance, Negrete had recently taken drugs, including ecstasy, and had attended raves. In his opinion, Negrete had, while under the influence of drugs, left the building and subsequently been abducted. It has also been suggested that Negrete's disappearance may have been linked to the illegal trade in human organs. So I believe this is like
Yeah.
a great segue for us. So I believe you've wanted to discuss this fact a little bit about the whole human trafficking in California, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had an opinion about this, and before I
Mm-hmm.
doubled down on it, I did want to do a tiny bit of research. So I was reading up on just the Wikipedia article on human trafficking, and you look at it, and this is obviously not the only document on this, and
Of course,
obviously,
yeah. Just
yeah,
a
yeah,
general.
just a general thing. I mean, there's of course things that might be missing, but if you look at the article, I don't think there's anything about organ harvesting so here's this. Let's go down this. So like when you look at like why people get get kidnapped or end up in human trafficking, there's a short list. So at the top of that thing, I think they mentioned like there's like exploiting of children. Well, he wasn't really a child anymore,
Yeah.
at least legally. And then they say, well, some of the other things on there are like sex trafficking, so people that end up being forced into work as prostitutes in places like massage parlors or real brothels. That doesn't seem likely for a 18-year-old fairly strong man. Once again, I feel like other things would be much more likely. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and domestic servitude, once again, it's like a couple things. It's like let's look at this from a practical point of view. Let's suppose you're some kind of evil person in Los Angeles who wants to wants to somehow acquire basically a slave, a someone who you have enslaved or kidnapped or imprisoned against their will.
Yeah.
Um, it seems like a very bad idea to choose a upper middle class student at a highly ranked national university in one of the most crowded cities in the world. I'm sorry, in the United States at least. Um, uh, it seems like that person would be missed, and that's actually my
Yeah,
right.
I definitely think we can rule out, domestic servitude. I don't think,
Yeah,
Michael was, if he was abducted, he was probably like, I don't even know why would he be abducted, but domestic servitude definitely doesn't seem like the most likely turnout of events.
yeah. I mean, none of these really seem to fit. I mean, there is, of course, a lot of talk about whether or not there is some kind of like trade in people being kidnapped from the U.S. and other countries to then be exported to countries where there's less oversight and where people specifically want, let's say, someone of a certain race or a certain gender or a certain national identity, etc. It doesn't make sense to me. So but that also applies, I think, to if you look at Michael's brother's comments. I feel like he's leaning towards organ harvesting, and I think organ harvesting is one of those
Right.
things where so just for the audience, organ harvesting is the idea that you would take somebody, whether they were alive or freshly killed, or in the case of organ donors had just recently passed away, and that you would take this person and essentially cut them apart like you would cut apart a car in the chop shop, and take their corneas and their eyes and their kidneys and their heart, etc. Things that have a big market value. My issue with that is that I cannot, for all my entire life living here in Los Angeles, which is my entire life, I cannot ever remember hearing that happen to anyone here in this city. And you think
Mm.
that would be the kind of red hot, like headline grabbing story that they would, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
push.
That seems like, if something like that would have happened in recent times, especially in a country like the United States, like someone was kidnapped for their organs. Basically, I think that would make headlines all over the country, because these types of things, they usually happen in like third world countries, because human trafficking for organs, this is, we don't have to like debunk this theory. Everyone knows that this is a real issue in the world, but these things usually happen in more, let's say, not so well developed countries around the world, and definitely not in the heart of the city. It usually happens in rural areas, and there are sometimes people, they give their organs willingly. There are like a lot of misconception that all of the
Yeah,
organ trafficking is done by, necessarily always killing the victim. Sometimes people get scammed for their organs, but that's a whole nother topic. So yeah, basically
yeah.
organ trafficking, um you know it could have happened, but I just don't see like a lot of links between this case, between Michael and the organ trafficking. Like, is there like a suspect, or something like that? Like, am I missing something, Glenn?
No, I don't think so. I mean, not for that specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, use case. And then it's worth pointing out too that like, for organs, even back then, there were other markets that someone that really wanted to get a heart or a kidney or a cornea over the black market could go to. There's I'm not going to mention any specific countries, but there's countries where, um, they already take a lot of those organs from like executed prisoners and things like that. It's
Political
also worth,
prisoners and so on.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, religious,
Mm,
minorities sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're once again not going to say who that is, but so you look at that, and then you look at the fact that in Los Angeles, once again, Los Angeles has a huge population of especially people that I would call marginalized people, or people that are unfortunately not really cared for, or won't be missed. So you've got a lot of homeless people,
Yeah.
got people who are not necessarily documented, so quote unquote illegal immigrants,
Yep.
um, etc. Where it's like you would think if somebody really wanted, even an 18-year-old heart, and that's what they want, someone that was healthy. There's still a lot of people that they could have picked for that would have been way less missed than this
and
guy.
and definitely, don't you think it would, they could have like picked a better strategy in like acquiring like
Yeah,
organs from an 18-year-old? Why would you go into the middle? Because I believe Michael was living somewhere, in the middle floors of the Dykstra hall or something
right.
like that. So you would have to go through all of this trouble to, pass all of these witnesses that did spot you. If we are linking the human trafficking to the unaccounted, Caucasian man that was seen in Dykstra Hall on that same night, he already like had witnesses, spotting him. So to go through all that, hard work to just kidnap a kid basically for his organs, that's reaching a bit, in my case. Why wouldn't you, pick like a kid, like, I don't know, anywhere from like a less crowded area? Why would you go like to the probably the safest place for kids to be? So
Yeah,
it doesn't add up, in my opinion.
I mean, you're right. It's like it would be like trying to snatch somebody out of like the middle of like like a crowded town or something. I mean, UCLA really is sort of like almost a city within a city in terms of how many people are there every day, and even just one dorm building is like the equivalent of a small town.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it just seems very
Definitely
odd.
where I'm from, like we have towns that have like lesser populations that that basically UCLA has students. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's a weird strategy, to say the
it,
least.
it's even worth pointing out UCLA, because once again, land is at a premium here in Los Angeles. UCLA dorm rooms are extremely crowded. So when I lived there, I actually had a little bit of a luxury setup in that I lived in a suite. So we had two bedrooms, which could either have two people or three people each in them. I had a roommate in my bedroom, and then we had two in the other bedroom, and we had a living room. But the people living in Dykstra and other
Right.
similar buildings, they are sharing what is a very tiny room, either or three people to a room. So there's a lot more people inside those rooms than you would think. I mean, it is extremely crowded in there. It was one of the reasons why I didn't do that kind of dorm, because it would be like living in a closet with two other people.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, in terms of construction, we can see that construction is being done as late as as this Google Maps footage is done. So
Oh yeah,
yes,
constantly. So that's actually a good. Well, why don't we do the segue to the 35-year-old man and how some people seized on that, and who this guy some people think is, and then we can go into how realistic we think
oh yeah,
that could be.
so basically this is a whole another rabbit hole that yeah, we should definitely mention. So basically this little girl that you are seeing on the screen right now, well, she is Danielle Van Damme, and she was it was really unfortunate. She was found dead on 2002, basically in the February month. Her body was discovered on February 22nd, 2002. So basically 3 years after Michael Negrete went missing. And yeah, so basically the sketch, yeah, so how I will tie this case to the Michael Negrete disappearing is that basically there is a sketch of that unaccounted man who was in Dykstra Hall on the night of Michael Negrete's disappearing. And so on the right side, you see the sketch of basically that unaccounted man that police has released. And on the left, you see the father of Danielle Nicole Van Damme. His name was I cannot remember his name at the moment. Oh, Damon Van Damme. Yeah, so his name is Damon Van Damme, and basically there is this article or like this website, dedicated to solving this case of Danielle Nicole Van Damme. And basically in this article, they are actually trying to, you know, link basically that girl's father to Michael Negrete. So I'm sure that you've heard about this article and this website, Glenn. So maybe you could like shed some light on this whole situation right here.
Yeah, so that was I think over the past 10 years plus, when I've been reading, trying to, every year I read up on this case and I look at it, and yeah, this guy popped up. I mean, admittedly, so he's a friend of the family. He's a friend of Michael Negrete's family, so it is somebody that like he would have been comfortable probably even getting into a car with. So on one hand, that does kind of point to like if he was somehow abducted. Um, this is one scenario where it could have happened. This is not saying this is what happened. This is saying that, like, to what we were just saying, all those objections we threw up a few minutes ago. This is saying, well, here's how somebody could maybe have gotten him to walk himself down to, a vehicle or something, where then he was somehow abducted, or later on
Yeah.
was taken out. So and I will say the sketch and Damon, they do look pretty similar. I mean, even the eyes and the hair and the nose and the
I
lips.
mean, yeah, like I mean, we're definitely not like insinuating anything here, but like
Yeah,
like these sketches, because I've seen like a fair bit of these sketches, and when the actual uh, perpetrator is found, usually they look nothing, or like they don't really look that similar to the sketch. So, given that fact, this like the sketch just happens, to look fairly similar to Damon Van Damme, but you know, I I personally think this is just a coincidence. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, the theory was so. I guess this Damon guy worked with Michael's father, and they live in, I guess, the same part of San Diego. And I think there were some coincidences,
Right.
like Damon was actually visiting Los Angeles at the same time this happened. Um, it, and then to further complicate things is here's where it gets weird. So the reason why there seems to be so much attention on him seems to be two things. One is the guy does kind of look like the sketch, and he was, kind of in the area at the same time. But the other thing is there seems to be a campaign, and I'm not going to point at the site. I'm going to say that there have been allegations that some of this campaign pointing fingers, or at least saying we should be investigating this guy,
Yeah.
some of it seems to be related to what happened to Damon's daughter. So, Juras, as you alluded to earlier at the start of this point, um,
Hmm.
Damon's family had a tragedy happen a couple of years after what happened to Michael, and what happened was his daughter was abducted from the house. It's kind of weird. It was a whole big long thing where like it was almost similar to like John Bonet in some ways, or some other,
Yeah.
or the Polly Kloss case where
Right.
he put her to bed, and he went to sleep, and his wife was off, I think, with friends at some bar or something. And then the wife came home, and she noticed like a door was open or an alarm light was on, but they thought it was just like one of those things. They didn't think
Yeah.
someone actually broke in, and somehow they didn't figure out their poor daughter had been abducted until the morning. Um, then there's this whole
Yeah.
investigation, right?
And so
Right.
basically the main suspect was then later charged of, the murder of Danielle Nicole Van Damme. So David Westerfield, the man that you are looking at on your screen. So basically, this guy was the neighbor, and he was a self-employed engineer, and he was making a good living. He had a nice house. He had a nice new RV that he, took out every once in a while to just drive around, the San Diego area and whatnot. And basically, on the day that Danielle Nicole Van Damme disappeared, basically her blood. On the same day, this man, David Westerfield, he sort of vanished as well. He went like to the deserts, and police officers investigating the case, they couldn't find him at first. Then they like contact him a while later, and eventually they found Danielle's blood on his jacket, and also on in his RV. So basically that led everyone to believe that this man had during the night kidnapped Danielle, and then he sort of murdered her and drove her off into the desert. So he was basically charged with the murder. And there's like, we're not going to go into this case today, maybe for another time, definitely. But so basically, this, like, the evidence that this man had, killed Danielle Nicole Van Damme is quite substantial, at least in my eyes. And so I would sort of rule out Damon as the guy that kidnapped Michael. So that's my stance on it. What are your thoughts about like this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean that's the we mentioned him because it seems like, so what happened, yeah, like you said, they found a bunch of blood evidence and DNA. They caught him in a couple of lies. He failed his polygraph exam. They had a whole trial about it. He was convicted, and he is on death row right now. But in California, being on death row is probably means you'll die of old age, because we don't really do executions here, despite giving
Yeah,
people the
yeah,
death penalty.
I've read about that. Like he's probably not going to,
No,
get
no.
executed. Yeah.
he'll live out his whole long life. But yeah, we mentioned him because it seems possible. And it kind of looks like someone that either is connected to him or at least is a fan of him is trying to muddy the waters and make it look like potentially this Damon Van Dam person. There seems to be deaths connected to him, and that maybe he had not only killed Michael but killed his own daughter. A whole bunch of like muddying the waters and a little bit of kind of
Yeah, well, this article,
slandering someone.
yeah,
Yeah,
this article in particular also like links Damon to like other disappearances like Adam Walsh. Then we have Tiffany Louise Sessions, who has also disappeared in '89. So um,
and
it's
then
definitely an interesting read. I think we'll look into it, and if we can leave the link to this website, it's definitely at least interesting to read. So if our listeners want to look at the site, it's called unposted.com, and we'll probably end up leaving the link in the description. So, and the articles, it's like you can go here, go to the site and look, make your own conclusions. I mean, the author of this site, he probably won't mind the extra attention to the site. So I think we're all good here. I don't know the motivation behind like trying to link Damon to the disappearance of Michael, but yeah,
yeah.
it's a little bizarre for me personally, but that's just my opinion, and that's that pretty much.
So the part that for our show takes this full circle is because our number 2 episode 2 was about the John Benet Ramsey case,
Yeah.
and all the stuff associated with that. Well, if you recall from our episode on that, there were a bunch of people who had claimed responsibility. Some seemed to be crazy or want attention, and I mention this because one of those people supposedly also um, also claimed credit for killing Danielle Van Dam. So when I read that, I was like, oh, we should be sure to mention that because it was interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like some people make a hobby out of this, but yeah, it just shows you how convoluted it can get and how often there'll be kind of these red herrings that pop up where, whether it's this Van Dam guy or whether it's, people in other cases where it just makes it harder to figure out what happened there. So, I'm glad we covered that because it is
Yeah.
something that I think anybody looking at this case, they've heard about it by now. Certainly, will offer, everyone listening the resources to try to look into that themselves.
Yep.
One of the other things I wanted to consider. So when drugs got brought up, and I have kind of a list of maybe likely or unlikely things that happened
Hmm.
here. Let's look at like a psychotic break.
Yeah.
So, this is actually the age. It's I think we've seen this in the news a lot. Sometimes when someone hits around 17, 18, 19, 20, things
Yeah.
like schizophrenia, and other like major psychological issues that sometimes are hereditary, sometimes those crop up. So it isn't unusual that somebody might suddenly at age 18, 19, 20 almost become their behavior might become completely different than when they were a younger person, and they might do something like wander off. So that's I think is a possibility. Is I guess I could see somebody doing something that seems illogical, like wandering up a hill to a bus stop and somehow just randomly wandering off. Um,
Yeah.
Once again, it's one of those things where it's like you don't have any other accounts by anybody else pointing like, oh, he was acting weird, oh, he was talking about voices in his head, nothing like that. So there was nothing
Nothing
that's
out of the ordinary. Yeah.
yeah. So then I think that finally kind of comes along to and it'd be interesting to see what you think about this, Juras, about how about this possibility. So I mentioned all the construction, I mentioned
Hmm.
it a lot.
Yeah.
And this has actually happened before in other places. So you have a lot of construction on campus. Um, And in fact, you have people sometimes that even make a hobby out of going either into construction or into, let's say, hidden places. Sometimes when you have a really old building or a really old complex of buildings, somehow you have old tunnels and, like, things for like infrastructure like sewage and plumbing and
Mm-hmm.
electrical, etc.
Yeah.
I would not doubt that UCLA, just like a lot of other big places like that, huge, and UCLA has, if you go to the science side of the campus, has buildings that are like just have a lot of different weird levels and first floors that are not where you think they would be. So here's a scenario. Someone like Michael, he goes, he has his party that night. Maybe he's a little drunk or tipsy. Maybe he's under the influence of something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he goes, he plays his game, until 4 a.m, sees his friend. They say, "Yeah, good job, you won." And then he walks back, and though it doesn't sound like he was this inebriated or, otherwise encumbered consciously, let's suppose he somehow wandered around campus and fell into an open construction area that, for whatever reason, his body wasn't discovered. So that's what when I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
this out, I think this is the part that baffles me the most about this case.
Yeah.
And try to collect my thoughts around this. Is they find you have a person who disappears in a huge city. Um, he wasn't near any major bodies of water. He wasn't near even what we call the LA River. So the LA River is like sort of this concrete lined set of channels that funnels what used to be LA River, but now is really just sewage water and runoff water from around the city. And that has been known to kind of make people disappear
Mm-hmm.
or kill them. But he's not near any of that stuff. He's not near any bodies of water. Let's suppose he had like killed himself, psychotic break, or some other reason, depression. Once again, no evidence for that, but like there should be a body, right? It's really hard to kill yourself in some place. Even when you kill yourself, like in an ocean or a river or something like that, usually the body turns up somewhere. Um, so this is like really weird, is like because it's being treated as a homicide case at this point by the police department, by
Yeah.
UCPD. And this is, I think, what makes it depressing that they don't have more information about it. But I think all of the authorities have pretty much written off that he's still alive. They feel like somebody like this would have, short of a psychotic break, but once again, psychotic break, you should have turned up maybe in a homeless shelter
Mm-hmm.
or on Skid Row, Los Angeles, etc. Somehow, this person, their body has just disappeared. They completely disappeared. It's completely weird. So that's where I think about, like, well, how could somebody disappear on a campus like this around all these people,
Mm-hmm.
even early in the morning when there's nobody out, really. 4 in the morning, it is pretty empty at UCLA on the streets. I feel like it is possible, and we've seen this sometimes. Like I know I can think of one case I read about on someone else's YouTube. Actually, I think they put it on someone else's YouTube where they were taking down a house that was out in the countryside somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They were taking it apart, and they found a body in the chimney, and it had been somebody, for no logical reason, had tried to break into, for whatever reason, had tried to go into this abandoned house.
I think
Do
I
you remember
know.
that?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely heard. Wait, was it like a child or something, like a
Yeah, like
really?
like 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 a teenager, like or
Yeah,
somewhere, around the stupid age that you might do something like this, thinking you're Santa Claus or something. And
yeah.
what a what
I believe
what a
he
way to
got.
die.
Yeah, I believe he got stuck, and
Ugh,
he basically starved, or
expired.
yeah, just
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I definitely know like what you're talking about. That case is really like shocking and super unfortunate and really sad. But yeah, I definitely know that case in particular, and yeah, I definitely can see like this side of like the this theory that Michael was like drunk. He was a kid. He was still a teenager. Maybe he decided to do something stupid, given the fact that there was so much construction around the UCLA campus. Maybe something like that could have happened. Yeah, that's not out of the question. But then again, why, you know, no bodies were ever turned up?
Were never discovered. Now
Yeah,
here's
that's
here's
weird to
here's
me. Yeah.
crazy. here's my crazy conspiracy. I only throw this out. I don't throw this out here
Okay, yeah,
to
okay.
besmirch anybody. But let's say you were a construction contractor on this job, because a job like this is so huge. You probably have multiple companies working for you. I could see a scenario where, like, suppose you're a contractor and maybe you left the job site overnight in a state that was unsafe, or at least you were worried that if something had happened, let's
Mm-hmm.
suppose you're like, you're pouring concrete or whatever it is you're doing, this hole's got to be filled tomorrow, and you're like maybe the company owner or someone, you show up the next, or the supervisor, you show up the next day, and, like, I don't know, you see blood, you don't really know what's down there. Maybe you know what's down there, maybe you don't. Maybe you think maybe you don't really want to know. Like, maybe an accident happened and you're like, oh crap, not only am I going to lose my job, I might lose my house because I'm going
Oh,
to get sued. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Now that you put it like that, it definitely, sort of, makes sense, because like obviously I'm not saying that happened.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
still but like just as a theory, it would make sense because if you're like a business owner and like you see that an accident happened on your construction site, I'm pretty sure like your business is pretty much done, because you have not like made like the proper you didn't take the proper security measures to ensure that that did not happen. So if an accident does happen, I mean, but still, like, to cover it like that, you would have to be like a savage person, you know what I'm saying? Like you would have to
Yeah.
just
You would have to be a
it's
pretty
yeah,
pretty selfish
it's yeah.
person to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, it's sad, but it does happen. Where people make business decisions that sometimes are very cold blooded.
Yeah,
It is worth thinking about that. Like, someone like that, they might be looking at that and saying, well, even if I don't lose my house or my business or whatever, I'm never going to get a UC contract again. They're never, you know what I mean? They're going
of
to say,
course,
oh, you
yeah.
you caused this massive embarrassing thing. Guess what, buddy? You're doing residential houses for the rest of your life because you're never going to work in a business like
At
this again.
best, I'm thinking like
Yeah,
residential houses at best, if you get any work at all after something like that had happened, so
right.
yeah, like, okay, when you put it like that, I can see like the reasoning for that. So that's definitely a theory, that probably has not been brought up. So good job, Glenn. We have one more theory
I solved it.
out there. Oh yeah, congratulations, Glenn.
They're just, hey, we can wrap it up. No, yeah. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously that's just one fringe scenario, but yeah, I do kind of think that, like, just with all the stuff that was going on with the construction, and it does not have to be that kind of malevolent scenario I put out there, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how someone's body, alive or not, could be completely concealed or destroyed. And when you think destruction is usually like fire or decomposition, or or other words, or otherwise being secreted away somewhere where they could never be found. And that's
It now that I'm thinking about it, like right here on the spot, like it's not completely out of the question that Michael ran into like an accident, and since given the fact that there was a lot of construction around UCLA campus, maybe he actually fell down like a hole or something like that,
yeah.
and then the construction guys just probably just covered it up because they didn't want to like ruin their reputations. But that why I think that's quite, I'm not saying that's likely or anything like that, but that's like worthy of like discussion, is because um since Michael's body was never found, so to me it's either like this had happened, like he got into an accident and it got concealed. Because if he just got into an accident and the evidence would not have been concealed, his body would most likely turn up at some point, and it has been almost like, yeah, it's been like 20 years at this point, and there's no sign of Michael. So it's either an accident that had happened, or he was abducted, because these are like the only two scenarios that I see that could have happened to Michael. And then also the third scenario would be like that he decided to either kill himself, or just start a new life. But that's why that's unlikely to me is that he was playing video games. He seemed like he was enjoying himself. He didn't leave a note. He didn't like prepare or anything like that. So I'm just getting a feeling that something unfortunate had happened to Michael, and it was not his decision, to go missing. So it's either the abduction theory or the accident theory, in my opinion. And as far as I can tell, there's no way to differentiate what actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I have a kind of a series of bullets I wanted to go over real quick, just to, sort of in conclusion. And I think
Yeah.
what is probably amazing about this case for both you and I, Juras, is so let's go over a real quick thing is just to recap. Dead bodies turn up all the time. So if something had happened to him that killed him, I mean, I own a couple of radio scanners that I listen to sometimes to listen to like the police and fire. The
Oh,
police,
cool. Yeah, yeah.
it's pretty interesting, and even in the relatively quiet part of Los Angeles that I live in,
Yeah.
um, firefighters find dead bodies all the time in people's houses. People
Mm.
die old age. People have heart attacks. They have strokes. I had a relative that had a stroke and died, and she wasn't found for several days.
Oh, wow.
It
Yeah.
happens, right? But dead bodies turn
Hmm.
up in the LA River. They turn up, et cetera. They
Yeah.
turn up at the beach. His did not, and certainly we have the technology both via DNA even back then and dental records, because someone like that for sure has dental records given how much his family cared for him and his like
Of
sort of soul.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, that they should have that. We mentioned that once again it's one of the most crowded parts of Los Angeles, at least compared to the adjacent areas. High density, so how does he go when no one sees him? We've covered what would someone want with him, and here's I guess this is the one thing. The one thing I kind of like, I think sometimes people do think about the kidnapping part because Uras, have you ever seen the movie Pulp Fiction?
Of course. Yeah. It's a
Oh,
great
okay,
movie.
good.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is. Even all these years later, it holds up.
It's
So there's
like,
that.
yeah, by far, like just like the '90s movies are like the best for me. I don't really like the new stuff, so yeah, it's a great movie. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly was Tarantino at probably his early best.
Yeah.
So there's one scene in there that almost kind of like reflects on like a worst case scenario for something like this. Where do you remember near the end when Bruce Willis's character and Ving Rhames' character they're fighting and they go into that shop and then they're essentially abducted,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yep,
For
yep, yep,
that.
yep, yep, yeah.
So this is kind of like I think that's one of those worst case scenarios where during that whole scene in the movie they they pull somebody out of the box. I almost don't want to call I don't want to use the word that they use to describe him because it's kind of a slur for
Oh,
disabled
yeah,
people. You
yeah,
know what I mean? It
yeah.
starts with a G. I'm not going to use it because I don't want to get SEO'd for it. Um,
No, definitely not.
have
Yeah,
it come out of my mouth. But
yeah,
but but essentially, it implied that they already had a slave, a sex slave, essentially,
yeah,
um, that they were keeping. And to me, by the way, me being claustrophobic, the way I mean, let's forget about what they were doing to that person. But
yeah.
just keeping him in that box was already like, just kill me now. I would never want to live like that. But yeah, so I think sometimes people think about that kind of scenario. I mean, look, Tarantino thought of it, right? Put it in his movie, and that's like one of those things where you're like, wow, what if that really happened to me, to a perfectly normal person? You know what I mean? Someone
Hmm.
kidnapped you, Evan. It does happen. It just seems like it's pretty fringe. So I mean, just my opinion, my 2 cents is, if I had to give a verdict for what happened,
Right.
um, I'm saying 75% chance that it was what I call death by misadventure.
Mm-hmm.
So that covers falling into a hole, wandering someplace where he got accidentally killed, but the body was destroyed, or
Mm-hmm.
otherwise concealed in a more permanent way. That's what I'm going to call misadventure, where it's an accident,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't intentional. He didn't kill himself. Someone else didn't intentionally kill him. Just something happened, and now they can't find him.
Yeah.
But it wasn't anything like insidious, or I mean, we haven't even talked about the paranormal, where some people might say, oh, he spontaneously combusted or he disappeared into another dimension. I've never seen
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Juras,
I've not seen those theories floating around, so
never, right?
I didn't even take that into consideration. Yeah.
I think if my 10 or 11-year-old self might have maybe brought that up, because I used to read a lot of books where they would talk about famous cases where people disappeared. But it's funny how
Yeah.
you don't see those cases so much after a certain year. So I feel like um, maybe the science
Hmm.
behind finding missing people got better, and some of those cases kind of didn't go into
Right.
the Dimension X realm anymore. Yes, and then I put another 25%
Hmm.
for suicide but undiscovered somehow. So maybe he fell into a sewer pipe, and just that sewer pipe is just not, it's just lodged in there somewhere after he killed himself. And finally, human trafficking in some manner, whether organ harvesting or he's
Right.
a slave somewhere. I put that under like maybe 25%. All those things.
Yeah, well, I didn't really, put my, opinions into like percentages because I don't really like have, this case. Like I've heard about it a few years ago, and you brought it up like last week when we were discussing, what topic we should be discussing on this week's episode. So, I looked back into this case, and I just during my research, I just really couldn't like have like any sort of like concrete opinions on what actually happened to him. Like I know that the only thing that I could like my thing is that I'm probably ruling out um the whole his suicide or like deciding to start a new life. I'm ruling out the fact that he willingly disappeared. That's all I'm gonna say. Like I don't think he disappeared willingly. He had a loving family. He was a popular kid in UCLA. He had a music scholarship. It seemed that he was doing something that he really enjoyed, and he was having fun right up until the time he disappeared. So all I'm gonna say is I'm definitely ruling out that part of the case that he willingly disappeared. I think something had happened to Michael, and it's sad that this case is being like forgotten, you can say, and his family members are still trying to find out what happened. So I think this was a good episode for us. I think we did, our part in bringing this case back into, somewhat of a light, and maybe our listeners have their theories. Maybe they actually know something about the case that we don't know. So, we actually got some feedback on our last episode, the USS Nimitz UFO incident. So it would be really awesome if our viewers would leave some sort of a feedback on this episode as well. We are definitely looking forward to seeing what you guys think about this case. And as for today's episode, we've actually broken another record. Even we when we like were discussing about this episode, we were probably thinking this is gonna be sub 1 hour,
Yeah,
and it
fast one.
actually it's like almost an hour and 20 minutes. So this
Wow.
is
My, my
like
my mouth
yeah,
has no limits.
yeah, yeah. So
The-
we're basically just making them longer and longer every time, and that's what she said. And yeah, so I think yeah, we pretty much covered the case
yeah.
thoroughly. Anything you want to mention, to our viewers before we sign out? Because I
Yeah,
think yeah, so
yeah, real quick. I mean, so just on this case, I think that for whatever reason, maybe because I also went to UCLA, because I saw similarities between me and Michael in terms of like maybe socioeconomic background, and of course living in the same place, you feel closer to somebody. But I think for whatever reason, I've taken this case really personally, and it has really bothered me um, every year that this goes unsolved. It's just one of those things where I don't know why, maybe just the reasons I listed, but it seems to bother me a lot more than other missing persons cases. And maybe it's because I feel like, oh, that could have happened to me, whatever it is, because I was living kind of a very similar life to him.
mm,
um, I think sometimes you look at that and you say, there, but for whatever happened, whatever chance there's in this world, that could have been me. But I also really feel bad for his parents and the rest of his family. Um, it's weird because it's like, on one hand, and this isn't to diminish someone that's lost a child like the John Benet Ramsey case, where that was just shattering, for that family, clearly for their relationship, for even the lives of the family afterwards. But sometimes I wonder if this is worse in some ways, or bad in ways that are not reflected in some of those cases, because you don't even know if the person's alive. And you always have all these weird feelings in the back of your head, like, well, what if the person is really alive, but they're not, for whatever reason, they're not calling me anymore. They don't want to see us. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
all these doubts that can creep in, that like knowing someone was dead, as horrible as that is, would bring some kind of closure, but the family doesn't have closure. And then, yeah, I'm frustrated that even the UCPD seems to have, at least for whatever reason, gotten rid of the webpage on this case on their site, which I can't fathom why they would do that. But yeah, it's something that I really hope in my lifetime we'll see some kind of solve for this. I mean, I would like to hope in some ways that he's still alive and that he turns up somehow, and he got amnesia and just amazing series of coincidences. He never figured out who he was until now. It would be much worse if he had run off and kind of put his family and his friends and everybody through this. But I think out of all the cases we've talked about so far, maybe not as much as the UFO case, because the UFO thing is like a bigger level topic for me, and the UFO case kind of pulls on some other issues that are big picture ideas. But for something that's not a big picture idea, this case is probably one of the ones I'm most passionate about. So, for anybody listening, I feel like I've probably been the most ramshackle on this episode in terms of being kind of randomly all over the place, but it's because I feel so strongly about it. Certainly, we appreciate your time, everybody, and thank you. Please subscribe to our podcast and to our YouTube channel, and please leave any comments you have, or any questions you might have, especially if you have questions. We would love to engage you in conversation, and we really look forward to furthering the conversation on this.
Yep, so definitely you can find us also on our social medias, which we will link in the description, so you can contact us on any of the social medias. You can, definitely leave us a comment in the comment section. We will definitely respond. And I think that's it for this week's episode, and I guess me and Glenn will see you next week on the next episode. We haven't really decided yet on what the topic will be, but I guess, everyone's going to have to find out next week. And yeah, that's pretty much it from us. Stay safe, guys, and peace out.